What is going on, guys? So we've got another stream for you today, another video. On this one, I wanted to talk something that's very near and dear to my heart because I spend so much time thinking about this and looking at it both from a macro and micro level. But one of the big things that we hear a lot about in Asia is how strong the Vietnam economy is, despite the global economy and most economies looking at deep recession, if not, on the way to a full-blown depression. Vietnam continues to be a strong player in the region, but I think it's being undervalued because I think it's going to be a strong player globally, and we're starting to see that in many of the things that are developing locally. So I wanted to just to pull this up and we can look at it and discuss it. So this article is from the Vietnam Investment Review. And so the title of that article is Vietnam shines amid global economic volatilities. Now, if you look at some of the macro data that we're seeing in the US, Europe, obviously, it's not good. But people here in Vietnam aren't feeling that. They're not feeling that slowdown in the economy. Now, there's several reasons for that, which we may get into some of those. But in reality, the economy is booming. So let's just take a look at this article and review it. So despite global volatilities, Vietnam's economy has rebounded strongly this year. It still, even during COVID, was going better than many other countries, making the country one of the rare spots in this global gloomy picture. And it has the potential to become a new tiger. So what we're talking about is a new tiger. Back several years ago, you saw Singapore, Thailand, and others being called that Asian tiger, because they were truly those countries that were growing and leaping at a whole new level. And so most folks here really truly believe that Vietnam is that next tiger, and I mean the Vietnamese believe it. So this report's out of Hanoi. Hanoi's, if you know Vietnam, Hanoi is the capital of the country. Much more of a government influence. Still a lot of business going on, but the real economic chamber, that train or that drive comes out of Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon. And Saigon's the largest city and really where a lot of that growth is coming from. So let's look at this. So the latest report from the General Statistics Office showed Vietnam's GDP growth rate in the first 9 months of 2022 hit a 12-year high of 8.83. Now think about that. That's coming out. Vietnam was strong before COVID. Coming out of COVID, everybody's looking at a significant loss. Now, some of this you can play this with the statistics, and it's what some folks in the administration in the U.S. are doing to make it look different. But this is a 12-year high, direct high of 8.83. Extreme numbers when we start talking about what it looks like at the global level. So if we look further down, that the 13.7% GDP expansion in Q3 was a record quarterly growth rate in Vietnam and surpassed the rate of 13.5% in India to become the highest in Asia this year. So again, we've got a country with 100 million people that's still very poorly developed overall, and so much room for growth, but so much opportunities in terms of expats and the ability for the global economy to really make this a spotlight of success. And what we're talking about largely, what I talk a lot about is the moving away from a China dominant or China reliant economy and dispersing those out and bringing that diversification. And so Vietnam is providing itself as a real diversification area that could be the next big thing here in Asia, next big thing in the world. So the World Bank has attributed Vietnam's rebound to a recovery of exports and the release of pent-up demand following the removal of the COVID-19 restrictions. We see that across the board. You saw that in the U.S. where everybody's going out and buying stuff. We see with fuel prices, everyone's driving again. forcing up those prices, but we're not seeing that type of inflationary issues here as that we saw in the US. Now, we are seeing one of the great things for exports is that the Vietnamese dong, and it is dong, D-O-N-G, is the name of the currency, that is weakened significantly to the US dollar, which makes its exports so much cheaper and allows countries to export so much more easily out of the country. So Vietnam's economic growth was reported in all three key sectors, of which services increased by 10.57% and industry construction up 9.63%. Construction is going on everywhere here. But the real big one for me is this agriculture, forestry, and fisheries is up 2.9%. It's so important both from an internal security perspective, but also an expert perspective to increase that agricultural number. Agriculture is such an important part of the Vietnamese economy because it's such a great land and such a great environment for growing fruits and vegetables and everything. And so we become a large exporter, but Vietnam is also consuming a lot of these products. And so if we go on into the article, disbursements of foreign direct investment in the first 9 months of this year have surged 16.2% year on year to 15.4 billion. Now, again, that's a year on year comparison, so you would expect that number to be significantly high, but it's still a record for the country. So again, we're seeing a significant amount of FDI coming in. I think people in the know have either already been in Vietnam or are quickly getting themselves ready to enter into the market. According to the Prime Minister, the economy has recovered very positively, with many cities and provinces nationwide reporting impressive gross regional domestic product in the first 3 quarters, with Ho Chi Minh, that's Saigon, at 9.97%. Now that's from an industrialized city showing a 9.97% growth. That is unbelievable. The numbers coming out. Notably, the Minister of Planning and Investment, Mr. Nguyen, said that the country's high economic growth has been accompanied by stabilizing the macroeconomy, successfully controlling inflation, ensuring balanced payments of the economy, and improving the people's living standards. Absolutely, these things have been going on across the board. Now, similar to what you can say has happened in China, that you've got a more or less capitalistic style communist country where the country and the leadership controls a lot of what's going on. I think that's true. I think there are many aspects of the Vietnamese living that is controlled, but I think here you don't have the heavy hand of the Chinese government. You don't have that heavy involvement on people's daily lives that you see in other countries. I mean, here in Vietnam, you don't have the restrictions. Google's here. Google's got a huge presence. Where in China, Google's not allowed. So there's no Gmail, no YouTube. They've got their own versions. Here in Vietnam, they may have their own versions. They've got, instead of using WhatsApp, everybody uses WhatsApp, but they've got their own version as well locally. But there aren't those restrictions. Facebook's here. There's no restrictions on Facebook. Anyone can use it. Anybody can log in and take part. It's not controlled by the government. So we go on through again. This article is extremely powerful when we start talking about the greater ability of the U.S. or of Vietnam to continue that growth model and become. I would say they can even use China as an example for growth and how to do it correctly and properly, and not have some of those systemic issues that China is now facing as their economy cools down. And so what we're looking at, we're going to continue those growth standards. It's going to continue to grow. I'll come back, as these numbers come back, we're going to continue to look at them. We're going to continue to drive into those numbers. We might get into some technical issues, but that gets a bit boring. But really, the flavor of this is to make that first introduction from a macro investment perspective into Vietnam, and try to see how it is going to be a global player for the next many years, and it will continue to grow. So I thank you for your time. I do hope that if you're not a subscriber, that you'll subscribe to me. This one's a little bit of a more dry content, more of an introduction to Vietnam. We're going to have a lot of videos that talk about the fun aspects of Vietnam. Now, this country is an amazingly fun country to be here. And like I've said in the past, I've lived in a lot of countries. I've lived all over Asia. Vietnam's at the top of the list. So let's look at it, and we will continue to drive forward. So thank you for your time, and I hope I can get your subscription.